A 16-year-old girl lives in a crumbling city. She's never known freedom. Every morning, a siren tells her when to wake. Every night, a curfew tells her when to sleep. She has a number instead of a name. Then she meets a boy, of course. He's from the wrong faction, the wrong side of the wall. Falling for him is a death sentence. She does it anyway. You've read this book. You've read it 100 times. It's sold hundreds of millions of copies across dozens of titles, like Divergent, The Hunger Games, Matched, Delirium, Red Queen. Same bones, same formula every single time. It just works. But here's the thing. That formula isn't hidden. It's a structure, a set of repeatable decisions about world and character. And today I'm going to break it down piece by piece so you can write your own. Hey everyone, I'm Jason and welcome to season 1 of Stroey Chef, a bonus show here at The Nerdy Novelist where we look at story like a gourmet chef looks at a dish, technique and instinct, creativity and skill. As always, this video is sponsored only by my school group, Story Hacker AI, where you get access to my Story Hacker tool. It lets you take these guides and use AI to plan your story. Click the link below to get started. Now, let's cook. Every young adult dystopian romance depends entirely on two characters, the heroine and the love interest. Get them right and readers will forgive almost anything else. First, we have the defiant heroine. This girl is what makes the whole thing move. This is Katniss, Triss, Mare Barrow, America's Singer. They're all built from the same parts. First, your protagonist is ordinary. She's broke, invisible, at the bottom of whatever hierarchy you've built. Maybe she's from the seam or abnegation or the red-blooded underclass. Young adult readers need to see themselves in her, which means she can't start special. She has to earn it. Second, she has a single person she'd die for. That could be a sister, a best friend, or a parent. This tether exists to give her a reason to act. Katniss doesn't volunteer because she's brave, she volunteers because Prim's name was called. Triss doesn't leave abnegation because she's rebellious, she leaves because the test told her she doesn't belong. The first big choice is always personal. Save my sister, protect my friend, and the ideology comes later if at all. Third, she has a practical skill, a real world skill. Katniss hunts. Triss is small and fast. Mare is a pickpocket. This skill keeps her alive in the early chapters before the larger conflict takes over. It also signals to the reader, this girl is competent, she can handle herself. Fourth, and this is the one most writers miss, she doesn't want to be a symbol. She doesn't want to lead a revolution. She's not an activist. She's a survivor who gets drafted into something bigger than herself. The reluctance is what sells it. It makes the eventual transformation feel earned. But then we have the love interest, and he's not a nice boy. Let's get that out of the way immediately. The primary love interest in young adult dystopian romance is a bit dangerous. He's either part of the system she's fighting, or he's so deep in the resistance that being near him could get her killed. 4 is a dauntless leader. Peeta is a tribute, someone she might have to murder later. Cal is a silver prince. The love interest is structurally wrong for her. Their connection shouldn't make sense to anyone watching from the outside. And he has a secret. Always. Something he's hiding from the system, from her, or from both. That secret becomes a plot engine. When it's revealed, usually around the midpoint or the end of Act 2, it makes you reread every earlier scene differently. He's physically capable, but emotionally guarded. He doesn't open up easily. You learn what he feels by what he does, not by what he says. He might train her or protect her when she doesn't ask for it, challenges her when she's being reckless. The romance unfolds through proximity and tension, not through dates and declarations. But there are other characters such as the rival or secondary love interest. This is the triangle corner. This is Gale, Peter, Maven. The character exists to represent the other path. If the love interest is the dangerous unknown, the rival is home. The rival is usually someone from her old world, someone she has history with. He's loyal, familiar, and often angry about what the system has done to their people. He is the revolution, or at least he thinks he is. Passionate, righteous, and increasingly willing to do terrible things for the cause. The heroine is choosing between two futures, two versions of herself. The boys just happen to be standing in front of each door. Then, of course, we have a villain. The antagonist in a young adult dystopia is almost always institutional. President Snow, Janine Matthews, King Maven, they represent the system itself. They're calm and absolutely certain that they're right. The best ones never raise their voice. They explain calmly and correctly why the system exists. They point out, correctly, that freedom is messy and people suffer in chaos. The scariest version of this villain is the one who was once like the heroine, someone who saw the corruption, tried to fight it, and decided the only way to survive was to become it. That's your main cast. Reluctant heroine, dangerous love interest, familial rival, and institutional villain. Every successful young adult dystopian romances uses them. Now, they need a world designed to crush them and a set of tropes that keeps the reader turning pages. If character is the heart, tropes are the skeleton. Readers expect them, and once you understand why they work, you can use them on purpose. So let's go through all of the major and minor tropes, starting with the chosen one, who doesn't want to be chosen. This is the big one. The heroine discovers she's unique, whether by test result, genetic mutation, special ability, or accidental public defiance. The part that matters is she didn't ask for it. She's not Harry Potter finding out he's a wizard and being thrilled. She's terrified. Being chosen in a dystopia means being a target. The chosen one trope works in this genre because it is the adolescent experience, just with the volume turned up. You're 16. You didn't ask to grow up. You didn't ask for your body to change, for the people to expect things from you, for the world to suddenly feel hostile. The system literally singles her out. Then we have forbidden love. The romance must be structurally forbidden, not just frowned upon, but dangerous. In Divergent, faction loyalty means fraternizing across factions is treason. In the Hunger Games, tributes are enemies. In Red Queen, reds and silvers don't mix. The forbidden element does two things. It makes every romantic scene feel like it could get someone killed, and it forces the couple to communicate in subtext. They can't be open, they can't be honest in public. Every stolen glance carries weight. The next trope is the sorting mechanism. Factions, districts, castes, colors. Every young adult dystopia divides its population. The sorting mechanism generates every conflict in the book. The sorting mechanism tells the heroine who she's supposed to be. The entire story is about her rejecting that assignment. The sorting also creates instant dramatic irony. The reader knows the system is unjust before the heroine does. We watch her slowly realize what we already understand. That gap is what creates tension. The next trope is trials or games. There's some kind of test, competition, or survival scenario. The Hunger Games, Divergent's initiation, Red Queen's arena, the selection's elimination rounds. This trope earns its keep. It gives you immediate physical stakes and a deadline. It also forces the heroine into proximity with the love interest while she's proving she can handle herself. Then there's the rebellion. Because there's always an underground movement, always. The heroine doesn't start it, she joins it reluctantly and eventually becomes its face. The rebellion trope works because it gives the heroine a community, a purpose, and a reason to fight that goes beyond staying alive. Now beyond this, there are other common tropes that you can use if you want, but are not mandatory. Things like the makeover. The heroine is dressed up, paraded before the public, made into something she's not. Think Cinna's fire dresses or Mare's silver disguise. It makes the identity conflict visible and literal. There's also the surveillance state. The government watches everything. This creates paranoia in every scene and makes private moments feel precious. Then there's memory manipulation. The system controls what people remember. This raises the question, can you trust your own mind? There's also the mentor who dies, someone older and wiser who guides the heroine early on, and they die to prove the stakes are real and to force the heroine into independence. Then there's the cliffhanger ending, because YA dystopian romance is almost always a series. Book 1 ends with a major revelation or betrayal that reframes the entire story. Maven's betrayal in Red Queen, the quarter quell announcement, the war beginning. And then there's the love confession under duress. The first I love you never happens in a quiet moment. It happens during battle, during escape, during a moment when one of them might die. Comfort is a luxury this genre doesn't allow. Now these tropes are tools, and if you get them too wrong, readers will notice and they will leave all kinds of 1-star reviews on your book. What matters is knowing which ones to use and when, which brings us to structure. Because young adult dystopian romance doesn't just use these tropes randomly, it arranges them in a very specific sequence. Here's where we get surgical. YA dystopian romance follows a tight plot structure. Not every book hits these beats in order, but the pattern is consistent. Here's how it goes. We start with the opening image, life under the system. The book opens with a normal day in the heroine's life, but normal is oppressive. We see the rules, we see the poverty, the surveillance, the rigid hierarchy. Katniss hunts illegally to feed her family. Triss watches the factionless and wonders if that's her future. Mare picks pockets in a world that considers her subhuman. This opening does three things. It establishes the world's injustice, shows the heroine's survival skills, and makes the reader angry on her behalf. Then we have the inciting incident. Something happens that yanks her out of her ordinary life and into the system's spotlight. Prim's name is drawn. Triss chooses Dauntless. Mare falls into the arena and lightning comes out of her hands. This moment is involuntary or semi-involuntary. She stumbles into it or gets dragged. Then we enter the new world. They transport her physically into the world of the powerful, the capital, Dauntless headquarters, the Silver Palace. The aesthetic shifts dramatically. Everything is beautiful, clean, and deadly. She doesn't belong, and everyone can see it. Then, of course, we have to meet the love interest. He appears in this new world. He's already part of it. He knows the rules, she doesn't. Their first interaction is charged, but not romantic. Tense, maybe competitive, maybe hostile. He sees something in her, but she doesn't trust him, and that's good. Moving into Act 2, Part 1, the trials begin. She enters whatever competition or test the system demands. She's behind everyone else, less prepared, less connected, and she knows it. But she's resourceful. She uses her practical skill in unexpected ways. Small victories build. The romance develops in stolen moments. The love interest helps her secretly. A late-night training session, for instance. A warning whispered in the hallway. Their interactions happen in gaps between the system's surveillance. Physical proximity increases, and the tension builds through almost touching, almost saying it, almost getting caught. The secondary love interest, or the old world friend, resurfaces. He represents home, safety, and what she left behind. He might be angry she's changed. He might be part of the rebellion already. His presence forces her to confront who she's becoming. Then we get to the midpoint revelation. This is where the truth comes out. The love interest secret is revealed, or the heroine discovers the system is worse than she thought, or she realizes she has a power that no one expected. This revelation splits the story in half. Before it, she was surviving. After it, she's choosing sides. This moves us into the second half of Act 2 with the stakes rising. The system tightens its grip. The system threatens or kills people she cares about. The mentor might die. The rebellion reaches out. And the rebellion asks her to become a symbol. She resists because symbols get people killed. But then we have the romance deepening under pressure. With everything falling apart, the love interest and the heroine finally stop pretending. The confession happens, not in moonlight, but in a bunker, a cell, maybe a stolen 5 minutes before battle. It's raw and terrified. They both know this might be all they get. But then someone she trusts turns. It might be the rival, the love interest, or an ally. In Red Queen, it's Maven. In the Hunger Games, it's the revelation that the rebellion is using her. This is the lowest point. Everything she believed was wrong. Everything she trusted was lying. And that leads us into Act 3 with the Dark Knight. She's alone, captured or broken, maybe both. The system seems invincible. The love interest is gone, taken, turned, or presumed dead. She has to decide, give up, or become the thing everyone needs her to be. She plants her feet, and for the first time, she's the one deciding what happens next. She accepts the role of symbol. She's the only one who can do this, and she finally stops pretending otherwise. Then we get the climax, the direct confrontation with the system. A battle, an escape, a public defiance. She uses everything, her practical skills, her allies, the love interest sacrifice, and her own fury. She doesn't destroy the system, not in one book, but she cracks it. She proves it's vulnerable. Now, the immediate threat is resolved after the climax, but the war isn't over. The love interest is recovered but changed. The system is wounded but retaliating. She's become a symbol whether she likes it or not, and the final page drops a revelation that makes book 2 inevitable. That's the overall architecture. 12 to 15 major beats arranged in a 3-act structure with romance threaded throughout every single one. The romance is the plot because in a world designed to strip away humanity, love is the most subversive act possible. That's the formula: reluctant heroine, dangerous love interest, a world built to crush individuality, a sorting mechanism, forbidden love, trials that force competence, a midpoint revelation, a betrayal, and a climax where she chooses to fight for the people she loves, not some abstract cause. You now have every major piece, the characters, the tropes, and the plot structure. What's left is the execution. The voice and the specific world only you can build. Once again, be sure to check out the Story Hacker AI group in the link below, and thank you to all of you who have joined so far. I couldn't do this without you. Take care, write well, and I'll see you in the next video.